G'day, brothers and sisters. This is the other Paul, and I'm joined by my man Geoff for a very, very nice stream tonight. Geoff, how you going?
I'm doing all right.
A nice American morning where you are.
It is. It's a little cloudy, a little spritzing a little. So, but it's starting to warm up in my neck of the woods.
Nice, fair enough. Unfortunately, because of the lateness here, and my parents and brother are asleep, of course, I'm going to have to be a little bit more quiet than I usually am for my eccentric self. But nonetheless, it won't affect anything. I'll be able to get going. Or apart from the fact that my legs are also absolute gelatin right now from leg day, so that's
you can see
me
the Lego world map behind me.
Oh, frick! I just saw that now. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really cool. That's awesome. That's really good. So is it just like a regular picture, or is it like actually Lego?
It's Legos. It's like pet little.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like studs and stuff.
That's freaking rad. That's so awesome, man. Rad. All right. And let's say good morning to people in the chat. Good morning, you Sly Rooster. Quack, quack to you as well. Quack, quack, buddy. Oh, poggers, mate. Very sad that I'll miss this. I have to get back to work in a few minutes. Gay. We always got the playback, thankfully. Thank God.
That's how you lost your Patreon.
Oh, yes. That's all good. I mean, look, it's so funny. I'm actually, and hello to you, Panos. It's actually so funny. Literally, when I first saw the email, I was slightly shocked, but I just burst into laughter straight away. Like it was somewhat expected. I didn't expect it to happen this soon, but like it was just a meme. It was hilarious. And I've got I had the contingency in place. I just got to with Subscribestar, you have to get your page manually approved, but they're not censorious, so it should be G. And God willing, up within the next few days at least. I've got a good amount of time until the end of the month when pay cycles are. So yes, but anyway, to get the show on the road. Oh yes, Reformed Presbyter. Good to see you here, buddy, as well. Very good to see you. Hope your day's going nice and well. I'm going to jump straight to it. So I'm going to share my screen. Hang on, I'll move my StreamYard first. So I've got two sets of tabs open here. Okay, cool. Share screen. Microsoft Edge tab. Review. No, not that one. Who's the Rock? This one. And do forgive it, but literally the very first frame of this video, Cameron looks high as a kite. I'm sorry, but
you can do that with anyone.
It's funny. Like it's not just like picking out a frame, and it's literally the first frame of the video. That's the funny part. Like if you scroll the video back to the beginning, you're gonna get that. So it's unfortunate. It's pretty funny, but it's like I feel like I can make a meme or a half out of that.
So we're doing this on 1.25 speed.
Yes, that's right. Thanks for reminding me.
As much as possible.
Yes. So I'll put it on 1.25. So basically debate review. Review of this debate with Jimmy Aiken and Dr. Nemes. And I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't the greatest debate in my opinion, because I have obviously I sympathize more with certain arguments from Nemes, but both of them, like even Nemes as well, the fellow Prot made arguments that I was like, not really. So we're gonna have at least I'm gonna have a bit to criticize from both sides here. But of course, particularly Aiken, because he's trying to push for a very, very particular interpretation for a very particular authority structure. So that's going to be very interesting. Oh, good timing, Kyle Marks, just as I wake up. Very nice indeed. This is the best way to start your morning, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, the quick plug before we go. No, not the Patreon plug anymore. Unfortunately, I'll have to change that. But do nuke that like button, carpet bomb the subscribe button, and do the same with all my other major social media, especially Gab, in the link tree below. And for Q&A, I intend to have Q&As at the end of this if we got time. If Geoff has to head off, that'll be all good. I could still keep going.
Yeah, you can still keep going.
Yes, but so people who were patrons before it got shut down, you will still have priority. I believe you can still access the patron questions section of the Discord, so I can pick you out from other people. And of course, super chats, that works as well. But subscribing once Subscribestar comes up will be an even better bang for your buck in that respect. Ewan, good to see you. Prime lunchtime viewing up here in tea drinking land. So I believe I want to start with, let me see. So I've got all the timestamps up here. There's Aiken's opening statement. I think I want to, I think I want to start. Let's actually give a brief overview. So Geoff, you've seen the debate, I assume?
Yes, the majority of it. Yes.
Yes. Let's give
I think
general.
I missed
I
a
like to
little
give
bit of the
general thoughts
beginning.
first because we're not gonna look through every bit. We're just gonna look at particular bits that interest us. So Geoff, give us your general thoughts of the debate, how it went.
I'm not fluent in Koine Greek by any stretch, so the most in the Q&A question I sent in, Nemes mentioned something about infallibility, which I thought was interesting, and then the other thing I thought was really interesting was I really like Nemes's point on Matthew using two different Greek words for the Petros.
Agreed.
But also acknowledging that probably in the Aramaic it was the same word. So I thought that was pretty valid. And then and when we cross it, we cross it. Like that was very interesting. But maybe the most interesting thing to come out of this debate was kind of Aiken's you ever watch SpongeBob?
Yes, I
have. You remember the episode where like the bully is like punching SpongeBob and he just keeps punching him, but because he's a sponge, he just keeps getting tired.
I think, to be fair, I haven't seen many SpongeBob episodes, but I think I might remember that.
Yeah. So to me, that was kind of it's almost like rope-a-dope sort of thing. Was just like you just keep taking the punches, and it's just like, which was yeah, your meaning could be correct, and then but my meaning can be correct too, and it's like okay, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Like, can you establish a meaning from the text or not?
Yes, that's right. Unfortunately, 100%. Brian D, great to see you here, buddy. I believe you were one of the latest patrons that you came on just before the Patreon got nuked, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Not to worry though. Subscribe Star will be launching up soon, so if you want to continue support, you better do it there. Anyway, so yeah, those are your general thoughts on the debate, I assume.
Yeah, and just you're faithful enough to like get nuked from Patreon, but not so faithful where you go to jail, Paul.
True that. I've still got a little bit of ways to go.
You still
I've still got to contravene
me too. I'm still progressing in my sanctification since I'm not in jail yet. So.
We're not at Moscow, Idaho level just yet.
Yeah, no.
Now, for my thoughts, it was a bit disappointing, the debate, in my opinion, because well, there was the main good bits really. Nemes on the emphasizing the fact that Petros and Petra are still chosen distinct words. Why is this being done? Especially if it was from an Aramaic original, that's like a really, really powerful observation. But as I'll probably explain as we get into it, there's so much more he could have expanded on with that to really make it strong, because it was pretty much just that one data point he hinged on, whereas there's at least like two others that combined with that make it a borderline certainty that it's not referring to Peter specifically. And then some of the other arguments he made, a couple of them were like a little bit questionable, like some odd, like very, very rigid, taking a very rigid interpretation of like imagery and typology regarding how like, oh look, the fact that Christ and the apostles are called the rock or a rock or a foundation, whatever elsewhere, doesn't gel well with Peter alone being the rock. And maybe that's not the best representation, but when we get to it, we'll hear what he says. And it's just like, look, imagery in text in general is fluid. You can use the same imagery for different persons in different aspects. Like just that very one that he mentioned himself, where he says at one point Christ is called the rock, and another the foundation rather, at another point the apostles are called the foundation. So imagery is fluid. So it wasn't really a good argument, but we'll get there when we get there. And I think I will send us to our first timestamp, and it's going to be on the whatchamacallit. It's going to be on a brief look at Akin's comment on the Aramaic kefa, and because I want to work in something very interesting. One of my scheduled interviews is coming up soon as a potential response to this, if I'm convinced of the thesis, that is, because if it's not going to be hinging on whether it's useful in Catholic apologetics, it's going to hinge on whether it's actually true. And if the thesis actually proves true, It would be significant for this specific question. So I'm going to move to our first timestamp, 1444. All right. Lovely. And we shall begin. I'll mute myself first, of course, because the echo.
New Testament Greek. And so we've got a real problem if we want to draw a rigid distinction on the difference between Petros and Petra. Also, this conversation in all likelihood wasn't occurring in Greek. It was occurring in Aramaic, as indicated by various Aramaisms that are in the passage. And in Aramaic, the word that would have been used in both cases, as many Protestant scholars will admit, was kepha, which is where we get Kephas, the Greek form of Peter's name. That's why he's called Cephas in the New Testament. It's just bringing kepha over into Greek and then into English. So according to many Protestant scholars, there wouldn't have even been a difference in the wording in the original Aramaic conversation. Having said that, that was all in the future. I didn't know that when I noticed these structures, but
a lot of his argument, he works it in with like basically his personal story of how he came across these arguments. So I pretty much just selected the bits where he just goes into substance. But with this bit, what's interesting is that on my 16th, I believe, I have an interview with a really, really cool Lutheran guy from Denmark, actually. And he's done big research, specifically on the Septuagint. I think he's done like a master's thesis or something on it. And it included a lot of research on the native language of Judea at the time of Christ. And I've sampled it. It's actually quite crazy. He actually believes he has strong evidence, and there's a number of scholars that actually forward this as well, that actually the native language at the time of Christ in Judea, at least for like public speech, was actually in fact Greek, and that there's actually a good number of evidence for it. And he's shown me a bunch of it already, which is pretty wow. Significant. So if that was actually the case, then it would likely actually show, well, no, the conversation actually originally happened, in Greek, most likely. Now, I'd still hold, for example, that Matthew's gospel was written in Aramaic, just from the early testimony, but that would simply be that he translated it.
To me, like that's up in the air.
Yeah.
That's kind of later thing is like, to me, that's up in the air. Like
sure.
Or it could have been Matthew wrote both.
Yeah, that's right. It's we really don't know whether either way.
Or but the fact of the matter is all we have is Greek.
Yeah, that's it. That's all that we have is the Greek. That is really the key point there. And as Nemes himself is going to argue in his opening thing, I'll let him do that. But basically, if the original language was Greek, then that would actually kind of turn this argument on its head, because it would show that the Aramaic of kepha itself was actually the translation. And so if we assume, for example, that Matthew was originally Aramaic and then the Greek translation was a translation from that, it put into question, is the Petros Petra thing a translation from the Aramaic, or was it a kind of translation where it went back to the original Greek and then brought it back in? It put in so many questions that this argument would
we don't have if it was originally Aramaic, we don't really have it, right?
No, we don't have it at all. Okay. But yeah, it would if that was the case, that the conversation actually originally happened in Greek. And for that particular passage in particular, talking to my friend, there is actually good evidence that it was originally in Greek. That would basically put too many questions for this argument to really have any effect at all. So yeah, that's pretty much my brief comments on that.
Well, to me, like this also, like when I do Jewish apologetics, one of the first things I got into is like Isaiah 7:14. So the Septuagint says for virgin or Alma. So the original Hebrew is Alma, right? And the Greek rendering of that word is Parthenos, which means virgin. Even though Alma, I guess the primary definition is young maiden or something. So, but I think it shows that the people who translated it understood that
that's it.
Virginity was in it.
Yeah, that's it. That's kind of ignored. They just assume that the Septuagint translators were wrong, rather than, well, hang on, these guys are very, very early. Maybe they actually attest to a meaning that we're ignoring.
Right. So I think this goes to Nemes's point, where whoever if this is a translation of the Aramaic by Matthew, or it was a Hebrew original that Matthew didn't write, or Matthew wrote, and someone translated it into Greek, which is what we have now. Regardless of whoever made that flip, okay? Because you could say like, oh, they spoke in Greek and then privately they spoke in Aramaic or whatever. That whoever did that decided like, I want 2 different Greek words here.
Yeah, that's the key. That's pretty much the key to Nemesh's argument. That's like by far his strongest argument, which we'll also see. I really don't think Aiken addresses very well at all. Like he basically does the thing you mentioned to us that you said at the beginning, that it could mean this or it could mean that.
Yeah, well, I think we did that offline. So just to say for the people, is like, or what I said in the intro is like, Aiken's just like, well, it could have 5 trillion different meanings. So
therefore submit to the Pope.
So you could be correct, while my meaning could also be correct, and it's just like it becomes an unfalsifiable.
That's it, yeah. And look, this becomes a key thing of nuance, like for charity as well. Like it's kind of like 2 kinds of ways of explaining data, where one is that your data is special evidence for your thesis. That's what evidence is. It particularly points your way and not towards others. Whereas that's different. This is something I've mentioned like heaps before, which is so key in these discussions, but very little emphasized. That's not the same thing as it being compatible with the data. So Jimmy could like come up with a compatible, like an explanation that is compatible with the passage. Like, okay, yeah, maybe the passage, maybe it's not strictly saying Peter is rock, but maybe my interpretation thing is true at the same time, and kind of a little wishy-washy thing. Sure, it could be technically compatible with the passage, but now it's no longer evidence. You're actually on the back foot trying to explain the passage in your view. So, and which is really not like the debate isn't just defending yourself. It's actually giving positive evidence for your case. So that doesn't really help Aiken when he does that.
Yeah. People keep saying I look like Jimmy Aiken. That's just because I have a red beard. So
I reckon
you're all racist. So let's keep moving.
I reckon lose the glasses, don't even shave the beard, and you could play Jimmy Aiken in like a biography movie.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be funny? All right. Next one is going to be, so this is going to be the core of his argument. So 20 minutes, 21 seconds. So this is where, actually, I think I might be slightly before. Hang on. Sorry about that. I think I actually might have gotten the. Okay. So I didn't get the beginning timestamp of the chiasm. It's right here.
Jesus has said that. That was all in the future. I didn't know that when I noticed these structures, but I started noticing these structures. So Cam, if you could put up the first slide, I'll show people what those structures are. Jesus has just said, as we mentioned, who do you say that I am? And they propose different things. And then he says, who do you say that I am? Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And in response to that, Jesus makes 3 statements, one after the other, which I've labeled here A, B, and C. The A statement is, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. He's referring there, of course, to the fact that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God. The second, or B statement, that he makes to Peter is, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or hell, shall not prevail against it. And then the third, or C statement he makes is, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now, the first thing I noticed once I realized that the passage was structured in this very careful way was that I had to take the context of the surrounding statements into account when trying to interpret that middle statement, you are Peter. On the view that I had always previously advocated, I understood that to be Jesus running down Peter, saying, oh, Peter, you're this little tiny stone, you're insignificant, but on this great rock of my identity, I will build my church. But that doesn't fit the context. If you look at the first statement, the A statement, why don't we go to the second slide now? If you look at that first statement, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, well, that's clearly a blessing. Jesus is pronouncing a blessing on Peter. He's not running him down. He's magnifying him. He's saying how blessed he is. And if you look at the third statement that Jesus makes to Peter, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, that also is clearly a blessing. that is not running Peter down. That is magnifying Peter by giving him this amazing gift. And so it really wouldn't scan logically if you read this as, blessed are you, Simon.
That's in
Jimmy,
the
you
original.
kind of cut out for just a second. Just back up about one sentence.
Okay. So it really wouldn't make sense if Jesus is saying, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. You're an insignificant pebble. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. If the first statement and the the third statement are both blessings on Peter, then we should interpret the middle statement in its context and say that's also a blessing. He's not running Peter down. He's blessing Peter by giving him this.
That's going to be the key to his coming assertion there, where he he makes it a fairly, I want to say fairly rigid formulaic thing, because I also don't think this is a chiasm, but I'll get to that later. But he tries to run this as a very rigid formula in the way he divides up the passage, which, by the way, the way he divides up the passage, he doesn't divide it up as a chiasm should be. I did it myself in Notepad, so I'll show it soon. But this is where he basically roots his case that this middle one, 2b, on this rock I'll build my church, it most likely refers to Peter, because the other two statements on the other, like above and below it, are quote unquote blessings meant towards Peter, and so the middle one is as well. And if it's a blessing towards Peter, then he's the rock. And in fact, I've got the timestamp for the exact spot. I don't know if you want to say anything, Geoff, but I've got the exact timestamp.
I'm just basing on the English translation here, so I guess it really hinges on what this is. What this points to. I don't know if you can tell or if it's ambiguous in the original Greek. And then prevail against it. So I guess the it would refer to the rock.
Yes. Or the church. I think there might be debate on that, because they're both in the feminine form. So that it is in the feminine form, so it could refer to, well, they're actually, no, it would refer to likely the church. I don't know. Either way, either one's technically possible. But yeah, so let's look at this comment first. Just pop it in and say, I wish I'd grow my red beard like Jimmy and could rock the cowboy hat. I'll listen later.
Gerardo makes an interesting question that we might want to table for later.
Yes, we definitely will be. That is definitely a good question. We'll definitely be looking at that in the Q&A, because I'll say this, I'm quite sympathetic to it. Actually, I'll continue on here just so Jimmy gives more of the information, but then I'll go to the timestamp where he gives the implication.
This name. Now, I also noticed each of these three statements, A, B, and C, has a two-part follow-up. So why don't we go to the next slide? There we go. The two-part follow-up explains or amplifies on the meaning of the initial statement. So in statement A, Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. And then in the two-part follow-up, he explains why Peter is blessed. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. So that's why Peter's blessed. He's received this revelation of Jesus' identity from the Father. In the third statement, the C statement, Jesus has said, I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And part of what that means is explained in the two-part explanation. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So that's part of what it means to have the keys. Well, if we've seen that in the case of the first statement and the third statement, the follow-up is an explanation of the meaning.
That's about to come up anyway, so I just want to skip.
And we need to read that middle statement, the B statement, in context as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Jesus says, and I tell you, you are Peter, that is explained by the reason he calls him Peter is, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades or hell shall not prevail against it.
You want to mute yourself.
That's what it means for Simon Bar-Jonah to be Peter. He's the rock.
Okay, this is the bit right here. I'll go back a few more seconds and I'll make sure to mute myself, but this is the bit where he makes a direct argument here.
That's what it means for Simon Bar-Jonah to be Peter. He's the rock on which Jesus will build his invincible church.
Okay, so notice what he did there. He didn't really actually demonstrate his argument. He simply assumed that what it means to be Peter is to be this rock that Jesus refers to, rather than, it doesn't even consider, as Nemes brings up in an argument later, that that could be a form of a derived name where he's basically taking the name from something else. Like, for example, with countless Hebrew names, like Elisha, for example, Yahweh saves, I believe that's, or God saves, I believe that's the one that says that. So names don't necessarily refer to, don't necessarily say something strictly about the person that the name is given to, if that makes sense. They often do, not necessarily though, because they often don't as well. And of course, he simply begs the question, linguistically speaking, that this necessitates that the middle statement must also be a blessing to Peter, because and again, I think Nemes will mention this later. the middle doesn't have to be in a chiasm the same thing, loosely speaking, as the things surrounding it. So the bottom and the top statement, the A and C statements. So he quite simply just jumps to therefore Peter is the rock, when on that when the issue at the fact that it's a chiasm doesn't really solve that, because it could be taken as a chiasm both ways, which I think he actually admits later on, when he says that the whole, like, look, your interpretation could be correct, but mine could be correct at the same time. And so he pretty much skips over the core linguistic questions of this middle statement.
So when you allow for like multiple things at the same time as your defense, like, how do you establish your meaning as like a meaning? Or
I'd say
like, I was like, if you go this passage can have multiple meanings route. Okay, in the defense against Nemes or whatever, like, how can you figure stuff out? Like, how do you do that? Like in Psalm 2, I was mentioning to you offline, but in Psalm 2, it's used for like the Jesus's baptism of the Holy Spirit, the resurrection, and the ascension. That Psalm 2 points to all three, and there's support in that in the rabbinic literature by one of the verbs in Psalm 2 has like kind of three meanings or something. So the New Testament writers draw that out, but he's not doing, that's not what they're doing there. And this is also not like a prophetic thing like Psalm 2. So this is a different class of literature, right? So if Jesus is saying like on the, so what is this rock? Is like, so according to Aiken later, this rock can be his confession and Peter. And so I'm a little confused in terms of like, once you get to the end of this debate, and then you pull it back to the beginning, and you start it over, then you're like, so is it both? Is it one? It's the other? It's the what? How are you? Because he's not arguing that it's both.
Yeah, that's it. And
so I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, that's it. And I'll actually mention now why I really question whether this is actually a chiasm here, because the thing with chiasms is that they have a very strong and clear conceptual, and at least generally, I'm not sure if this is an absolute, but at least generally, if not the vast majority of the time, particularly with like a small chiasm that just involves a few sentences or even just one sentence, they'll have like very clear like word repetitions in a mirror pattern. Whereas if you have like a chiasm that's across like a whole book, for example, it will be a very clear thematic pattern. And I don't think you have either here, because his chiasm seems to functionally be just these three layers, so A, B, and C. Technically, in this case, it would be so he doesn't really even construct a chiasm right, which is kind of odd in my opinion. So it would technically actually be A, B, and then A2. And so the A and C columns here are the ones that should be linked together if this is a chiasm. But if we read them, it says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And then the C one is, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And apart from just the one use of heaven, but in otherwise fairly lengthy sentences, and heaven isn't per se like really the actual thematic or lexical centers of these sentences, I don't think we actually have a true chiasm here. I actually don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some nature of chiasms that I haven't seen, but just from what I've studied so far, I haven't seen. This is the loosey-gooseyest chiasm I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't think it really can be called a chiasm because they're obviously they're related. They're part of the same statement. Ultimately, they're all ultimately leading towards the same argument. But when you're comparing sentence to sentence or word to word, whatever, there's got to be a much more closer specific link between them, and it's not really there. The first one is saying that Peter is blessed because the revelation that Jesus is the Christ was revealed to him by his Father who's in heaven. And then I will give you the keys of the kingdom, and whatever you shall bind on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Whatever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Although for one, the most conceptual thing they could be is because I actually interpret that final one there as actually referring to prophetic ability. So actually, now that I think about it, there could be a very unobvious chiasm. I think I just changed my mind live on air. Because that final sentence I see as actually the guarantee, specifically a guarantee of prophetic knowledge to Peter. So actually, yeah, I may actually have changed my mind on this just like that. So, well, you don't see that, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very, very rare moment on the other Prots channel. I'm all for. Hey, I'll always admit.
What were they debating? Like what on this rock means?
Yeah, they're pretty much that. But to comment briefly as well, to be fair, this is from my reading of the passage, and I don't think Aiken knows of this interpretation of that latter part of the passage. I don't think he considers that.
You might want to bring up Gerardo's 822.
Oh yeah. Actually, yeah, so that I feel like Jimmy's chiasm argument is speculative at best, since the chiasm can be reconstructed in different ways, and Jimmy chooses to construct it in this specific way. Yeah, that's, well, here's the thing. It's not really even now, because again, change my mind live on air. I'm all for the pursuit of truth. And obviously, if it means changing my mind live on air, I'm free to do that. I'm all happy for that.
No, but the one above it.
I could have easily BS'd my way out of it, but I didn't. I don't want to do that.
Comment above it.
That's his question. We want to leave that towards the end, I reckon.
Oh, we want to leave that towards the end because you were just about to go into that. So I wasn't.
To the queue. Well, stuff. We may as well look at it because we are going to look directly at that. But I'll look at this first. It's because it's speculative. It's how he chooses to construct is speculative. So now, with my minute-old new view, I don't think the way he constructed it is necessary. Well, I think that the divisions along 1, 2, and 3 are 1, 2A and 2B are a bit slightly odd. But I believe the A, B, C, I think that's a fair construction of, like, albeit a very basic chiasm at that. I still may think it may be slightly vague, but either way.
No, can I make a comment?
The issue is just one more second.
Okay,
The issue is his interpretation of the chiasm, which Nemes does get into quite validly, that he simply assumes that the middle thing must be very, very tightly like identical in a way with the surrounding elements of the chiasm, which is simply not necessarily the case with a chiasm. And so, yeah, anyway, what did you want to say?
You know, stepping back to the big picture, because Aiken wants to kind of establish a papacy here. So, I mean, they probably maybe in the Q&A or maybe in that missing section or whatever that got restored during the live debate. Maybe the patristics are kind of like a mixed bag on this, right? That some are Peter, some it's the confession, some it's who knows. I forget what else. There's like 3 options or something. But to me, like, so it's not like saying this is Peter is like a crazy option or outside the bounds or something like that. But it's a huge stretch to go from that to pull a Jimmy Aiken. Like, okay, I'll grant you this rock means Peter, right? Is to say it's just this rock, right? Where there's one foundation and there's multiple stones, which I think Nemes brings up later, where it's like, okay, so he was an apostle, and yeah, Christ did build his church on Peter, on what Peter was doing, as well as Paul, as well as Matthew, as well
That's
as
because I would actually 100% agree. I think it was mainly Trent Horn or someone else who made this comment, but basically how look, many Protestant scholars all support the Peter interpretation. So many Protestants like who do fervently argue against this, they're going like, well, why are you so fervently against this? Because that's a valid point. Because this could, if this referred to Peter, we could even just straight up add to the passage that, oh, Peter, you're going to be the supreme, absolute, epic Lord over all the church, you specifically, and that still wouldn't establish the papacy because then there's the whole argument of succession. So we could literally grant.
Well, okay, so you could go the Cyprian route where my former channel name, where like every bishop is built on Peter.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, every bishop succeeds Peter.
Yeah.
You could go. I mean, that's just one route. You can go multiple routes, well, then you also need like, and it's an ongoing office. And this is about not just Peter, but an office.
That's it.
That gets passed down, and it's established at Rome.
Yes. It's that
there's so many leaps before you even
that's it. Yeah, that's it. That's that basically that
I'm really stoked about your later video, by the way.
Oh yes. Thank you very much. Because I intend with that one to raise the Steve Hayes article that John sent me, where he basically illustrates the layers of extra interpretation that go into Matthew 16. Did you see that one? I believe I think it's called Back to Babylon or something. It's like
I saw the link. I didn't do it.
Peter is the rock, and B, the promises of the rock are exclusively to Peter. C, D, E, F. I think there was like at least like 7 layers of interpretation that would go into it to get to a papacy proof. So it's actually really funny and illustrative. So I actually do intend to use that from the late great Steve Hayes, one of the most underrated Christian thinkers ever.
I had the little chat group we're in offline. That really started with Steve.
Oh,
it was me, Steve, and John.
Wow.
So I got to spend a few years before his death just like running thoughts by him, and then like, oh, that's a good idea, and like, oh, that's a good insight, and then like I didn't realize how like it wasn't until he passed that I realized like what a privilege that was to be able to like just communicate with him like on a daily basis.
I bet. So, yeah, I bet. That's pretty epic.
I didn't even know he was sick. He didn't tell anyone. He just like, it was like Norm Macdonald. He was just like gone. And you're like, what? So.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway.
Absolute legend. Rest in peace, that legend. His stuff and Jason Engler's stuff was actually quite instrumental in keeping me from apostatizing, I'll say. So, yeah, very, very, very significant, very underrated. So I intend to make his name known in my content over time. But yes, I think that's basically what we'd say about this with Aiken's
argument. Do we want
to
skip to something then?
Yeah, sure.
In the interest of time.
I think it really does not appear. So I think I've pretty much just to summarize another point later on. I won't, so that we don't take as much time. He basically says later on that this central statement in B is like the most important, and it's sandwiched by 2 important but not as important statements. And so that central one is like the most important emphasized one. And
well, the binding and loosing, when we were interacting with Swan, your work on that was really good because they want to attach the binding and loosing stuff. And like they want to pour so much into what binding and loosing means today, as opposed to so a lot of it is we really, I don't know if this is what the debate's over, but your work on that is very essential to know.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I hope when you finish your book, you put that in.
Which one are you talking about? Because I'm working on like 2 right now, I think.
The contra papacy thing.
Oh yeah, that one. This my streams are well. Look, sober historian. Who knows? It's possible I could find some absolutely shocking truth that could see me going to Rome tomorrow. But as far as I know, because I have basically been studying this for like at least casually for like the past few years now, I'm pretty confident in my conclusions. So these, assuming that remains the case with these two parts, by the way, 2 parts coming streams, one on the monoepiscopacy of Rome and then one on the Petrine office, because they're big topics in their own right. I do intend to put that material basically into my big anti-pope, to put it bluntly, book, which, yes, by the way, in case people don't know, I'm making that as a book. And I'm also making a book on how Protestants can read the Church Fathers and not be persuaded by Roman and Eastern Orthodox.
Can you include that that Doge meme?
Oh no, which one?
The one with the 17th, 16th century Anglicans and like a teenager today. Just put that in the book, like as a page.
I should.
Like
I don't think,
on one of the front pages or something.
it would functionally. I don't think it would functionally be possible for anyone to enforce copyright on that, even though they probably technically could, because memes spread so far and wide. You know.
Well, if you don't defend your copyright, you.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
You
Sweet.
you
Perfect.
basically lose the ability to like just randomly like just sue someone.
I mean, if I can, and God willing, publishers aren't like, yeah, no, we're not doing this.
I think
Or
you
I might
reviewed
straight
that
up-
with Barely Protestant Father James.
Yeah, that's it. We reviewed the meme on there, but who knows? It's possible that I might even self-publish. Who knows? God willing, I can go with a decent big publisher. Either way. But yeah, I think we will skip ahead now. That was going to be his next point. He'll basically say the middle thing is the most important, and it's big, it's critical, and then combining it with his prior argument about how these are blessings to Peter, therefore Peter's the rock, and he really, and then also he goes on to how in this passage Jesus is primarily discussing Peter's identity, and so therefore, like, this rock, since that's such a central part of the passage, is most likely referring to Peter, which is, I mean, look, that kind of begs the question, because if we're right, then yes, Peter's identity is involved, particularly in the top and the bottom statements, but the middle statements could be the real central foundation of Peter's identity, that being the rock, which is either Christ or the confession or whatever, or the literal rock at the place on Heiser's interpretation, which we'll get to. And that's the center point of Peter's identity, not necessarily him being the rock, if that makes sense. So he really kind of begs the questions on those, on those points. So with that, I think we'll go to the beginning of Nemes's case now. If that's 2449, cool. And it's the beginning that's pretty much the best of it, but I think it goes hit and miss a little bit after that. But we'll see that.
And has multiple layers of meaning, so I don't exclude other readings. But if
there
you
we go.
ask what's the primary literal sense of the text, Peter is the rock.
All right, let's turn it over now to Stephen. Where would you like to begin? Would you like to respond to some things that he said here, or would you like to go ahead and just go ahead?
Why don't I just present my case first, and then maybe we can have some kind of back and forth after that.
Okay, sounds good.
So if you would, you can pull up my first slide, but you don't have to keep it up as I'm talking. It's just once I move to the next point, then maybe you could bring it up again if that's fine with you.
Sure.
Okay, so I want to present 5 reasons for thinking that Jesus is the Petra, the rock on which the church is built in this passage. I don't know that any one of these arguments is going to be perfectly convincing, but I think that taken cumulatively, taken together, they make a pretty good case. So let's start with this first one, to talk about the Petros-Petra distinction. Like Jimmy was saying, pretty much all contemporary commentators on this text admit 2 things. The first, that Petros and Petra mean the same thing. These 2 words by the time of Matthew's composition have the same meaning. On that, you can see D.A. Carson and other commentators. Second, that Christ, originally speaking in Aramaic, would have used the same word twice, namely Kepha. And he would have said, you are Kepha, and on this Kepha. So a lot of people today, commentators, don't really have much patience for the idea that because Matthew is using 2 different words, therefore he doesn't think Jesus is referring to the same thing. And a lot of times they will give these reasons why not to take this argument seriously, because the words mean the same thing in any case, and Jesus would have been using the same word in Aramaic. But I think actually that this argument can be turned around, because granted that the two words mean the same thing, and the fact that Jesus would have used the same word kepha twice in the original, there is no reason for Matthew to have Jesus say Petra at all in this passage, unless he means to distinguish between Petros, Peter, and some other thing, Petra. So in my reading, the fact that Matthew uses two different words there is actually an evidence that he does not understand Jesus to be referring to Peter in both cases. He says to Simon, "Sue Petros, you are Peter, kai epi taute te Petra," and on this Petra. Now, why does he use two different words if the words Petros and Petra mean the same thing? He could have just said "Sue Petros kai epi tuto te Petra." He could have just said Petra in both cases, but he doesn't. He says Petra. He says Petros first and Petra the second time. This, to me, to my mind, is an evidence that he does not believe that Jesus was referring to the same person. Simon is being called Petros because he is of the Petra, whereas Jesus is referring to himself as the Petra on which the church is built. And this is exactly the interpretation that Augustine gives in his Sermon 26 on the New Testament. He says that Peter is named Peter after the...
That's pretty much that with that argument, and it's definitely the strongest point of Stephen's case, which I think as many qualms as I might have with other parts of his case, I believe this alone is what brings him over the edge by a decent degree, because. And even then, there's at least two other, or possibly even three other points he could have brought up to really just settle this in stone, in my opinion. But yeah, it's an extremely good argument, and we'll look at it later as well. Aiken has a pretty inadequate response to it. Because it really is just very obvious. When you read the Greek text, it would be the same thing in English. If you saw this same construction, but in English, you'll get the same kind of.
So if you said like rock and rocky or something like that,
it'd be
rock and stone.
We have the passage in English. We can see the jarring distinction in the passage in English. So you are Peter, and then upon this.
Fair enough.
And then you. So let's change Peter. Let's make Peter stone, and then let's make the other part rock, just to get the word distinction in English. So you are stone, and upon this rock I will build my. That's basically, not precisely, but basically what's happening with the Greek. There's a very clear distinction, and it is primarily because of, there's one word uses Petros, one uses Petra, and that is a very common sense argument. If this was originally in Aramaic with Matthew, which I believe, but just for the sake of argument, even, why does he use two different words? And in fact, basically that. Why does he use two different words? Why doesn't he, why doesn't he even just make the construction even simpler? For example, you are the rock, you are Peter, or you are the rock upon which I will build my church, or you are the rock, and upon you I will build my church.
That's pretty good. The other, to me,
to clarify quickly, these kinds of arguments, it's very dangerous territory to get into. The author should have, or the author would have. That very dangerous territory. So in many cases, do not advise it. However, in this case, the actual text itself is so jarring that with
it's a play on words, though.
On the reading of saying that the two things mentioned, Peter and Petros and Petra, that they're referring to the same thing. So multiple elements and a bunch of others. So these are the ones in particular that Nemes didn't mention, which he really, really should have. So one, Petros and Petra, two different words, okay? But then two, going immediately from second person, you, to third person, and a third person demonstrative of this, right, in the Greek. And then finally, a different word of a different gender, grammatical gender. That's very significant. And my Lutheran mate, I don't know if he's watching right now. He might be listening, because I think he said he'd be listening while he's doing some work. But he made the good point, because he speaks a gendered language, if I'm not mistaken. Danish is a gendered language, I think it is. But he basically made the really good observation. I think he put it on Twitter recently, and I totally agree with it. Reading Greek myself, is that when you have two different words, when you have grammatical gender, there's a very different feel to it. So when you have two grammatically separate, grammatically distinct words right near each other, the feel of it is that they're not the same thing in that. So the fact that there's two different words at play, the fact that there's a switch from second person direct address to a third person demonstrative, and the fact that these words are of different genders, and then of course the alleged fact, potential fact that it would use the same word originally in the original writing, all these facts combine really, really, really strongly borderline prove that they are not the same referent here, that they're not. And this is why, given these very eye-opening facts, that's why in this case it is very, very it's very justified for us to say the author should have or would have done this instead, because it's so bloody easy in the Greek. It really is. It's a very easy construction for Jesus to make it more obvious, you know.
But can you pick
So,
up
yeah.
Gerardo's comment from 50 after? Because I was going to make that comment.
Yes. So Gerardo.
Yeah,
so
this is something I was going to say.
Yeah. Okay. To play devil's advocate here, Matthew's probably using a different word, Petra, so it doesn't sound redundant, just like our English translations use eternal life and everlasting life. Jimmy Aiken actually says the exact same thing later on. So one of the key problems is we can grant that it's potentially possible, but that's really it. It's only a potential possibility when we combine all this evidence together with different words, second to third person, different genders, and it's not just that, but it's the fact that they're right next to each other. We have a very sudden and jarring shift. This stuff together, it's just in the immediate reading. Like even before I ever got into these arguments, just reading that passage, I had the immediate thought, just in the back of my mind as I'm reading, these aren't the same thing.
To me, like what mitigates against that is that it's about identifying Peter, right? So to make that switch for literary purposes, kind of, if you're trying to clearly communicate that I'm identifying this guy.
That's it. So he uses the most.
It's not 100% probability, but it mitigates against that.
Yeah, that's it.
If you're using, as they mentioned up above, the Cameron Bayesian analysis.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, let's look at that. I have so much to say about it. So Cam on Pints of the Aquinas yesterday had some formula. I just watched it this morning on his computer, maybe in Excel, where he said he based on his criteria puts the papers here being 92.8%, and it's Bayesian analysis. Yeah, so I haven't studied a whole ton, but to put it very basically, Bayesian analysis basically where you establish the probability of something being true by basically plugging in the numbers of prior probabilities, and then you put in the variables of the thing that's true or not in that, and then it gives you a probability of how true it is based on prior probabilities. And I personally think, just by looking at it briefly, like when applying this to history is so freaking dumb, in my opinion. It really is, because history is not a mathematical formula. It is qualitative, organic, and there's a lot of missing data.
I think it's better suited for diagnosing problems in cars and in medicine.
I mean,
and stuff.
Yeah, that's it. Very technical
you have
stuff.
This symptom. This
symptom
input. Is this percent tied to this? This symptom is these two symptoms together, or like tied to this. But then, like, I think, to me, it's like I go to the 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, even. I don't see a papacy.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not there. Easy. So
it's not. No.
You put 0% chance
I
into your equation, and you. Okay.
Oh, look, 0.
And when you multiply by 0, you get 0.
And I think he's
I'm a simple man who doesn't understand Bayesian analysis, but
that's it. And Geoff, I think we'll actually, because I remember Matt Fred, I think he actually explicitly said on that podcast that Cam, I think when he's done with it, he'll actually release the document. So we should do a reaction with some alcohol.
Maybe too early in the morning for me, but I'll let you drink, and
depending whenever you can.
I'll do some morning drinking. I'm Presbyterian; it's allowed. So
that's it. Drink whenever the heck. And this is so true. As Jake Lund said, Richard Carrier has used it to demonstrate why Jesus never existed. That's it. Bayesian analysis, mathematical formulae in history can be abused so much, even in non.
Yeah, what's the Bayesian
matters.
analysis of the miracles, right? Like miracles,
that's
like
it's
how
freaking
often
stupid.
do
Like
they happen?
it's
They're like
literally
unique events by like definition.
that's it. Yeah, so it's literally stacking the deck. It's such a ridiculous stack in the deck. But I mean, for this case, obviously, I'm not talking about miracle here. But it's either way. It's a really really poor way of doing history. Yeah, you can use Bayesian analysis to prove basically. Yeah, that's it. You can. It just depends on what data you put in the variables.
It's a diagnostic tool. I think
values
it's best used as a diagnostic tool. Not that I'm a
that's
Bayesian.
it. Yeah, where in situations where you have a lot of very specific data. That's the key of it. Yeah, which is ironic because Trent Horn has said that Bayesian analysis isn't reliable. Ooh, spicy meatballs. So maybe he should tell Cam, hey Cam, you're converting for the wrong reasons.
Why is Cam drawn to this? Does anyone know?
I'm honestly not sure. It's like I just know all of a sudden he says at one point, I think I saw it earlier than most people. He says, look, I've got these problems with Catholic. I mean, people speculated beforehand, but I think I saw the real evidence of it before most people when he said, I've got these problems with Catholicism, but I'm working through them. He like using the language of like, you're trying to reconcile beliefs, you know? So like he actually wants to get these things like solved. And he said he was working with Trent Horn to solve
No,
them.
I don't understand what I want to know what the like, and you probably can't know from public, but like if you go back, like, you know, what's the actual impetus to begin with?
Yeah,
like for some people, it's like, oh,
question.
I'm a big pro-lifer, and they're into pro-life.
I mean, you know what? If he does convert, like let's seriously, people, let's pray he doesn't, because let's be real. Even though even though I myself hold to like a very basic kind of form of invincible ignorance and all that jazz, nonetheless, Rome does hold a false gospel. That's a fact. So at least, sorry for Catholic viewers who are watching. I would say that to not as great extent, but I would still say that nonetheless for Orthodoxy as well. But yeah, let's actually pray he does not cross the Tiber, because that's bad, very very bad for the state of his soul. But yeah, if that does end up happening, he will definitely have like at least interviews on at least like 3 different podcasts in the first week giving his conversion story. So if it happens, he will explain. He'll probably give those impetus.
Yeah, well, to me, it's like I tried to have a discussion with him, and
he just slapped you down.
Yeah, or I tagged him a lot on Twitter and some other people, but no interaction with him. That's fine. You know, I mean, he doesn't owe me anything, but I'm just kind of like, hey, like, have you? What I've said is like the mere Christian people don't really don't seem to have don't really prioritize the gospel so much in their Christianity.
That's it. That's like at best a minor footnote in their conversion stories.
Oh, can you get the last message or the Reformed presbyters?
Yes, this is extremely true. What Jimmy is really arguing is that it's Peter's office is the rock. That's definitely true, and it goes back to what we said. It's the 12 interpretive layers you have to put in to actually get anything close to a papacy. So,
can we keep moving?
Yeah. Yes, let's keep going. Nemes' case kind of flows fairly well, so I might just do occasional little skips, but otherwise it flows.
The rock, just like Christ is not named after the Christian, but the Christian is named after Christ. Okay, so just like we are called Christians, and our name of Christian comes from Christ, who is Christ, and we're named after him. So also Simon is called Petros, not because he is the Petra on which the church is built, but because he stands in a certain relation to that Petra in virtue of his confession of faith. So Simon is Petros, he is of the Petra. That's what Petros means here, of the Petra. And Christ himself is the Petra on which the church is built. Why do I say that? Because once more, Petros and Petra ordinarily mean the same thing, and Christ in Aramaic would have used the same words twice. So therefore, if Matthew understood Jesus as referring to Peter as the rock on which the church is built, he could have just said epi tou to Petro. He could have just used the word Petros twice, but he doesn't. He uses Petros to refer to Simon and Petra to refer to this thing on which the church is built. To my mind, that suggests that argument. A second argument is this. If you look at the way Matthew depicts Jesus and the way that Matthew depicts Simon in his gospel, it is entirely, I think, inconsonant with the general picture that Matthew paints in order for us to think that Simon himself is the rock on which the church is built. So I'll start with the depiction of Jesus, and then I'll move on to the depiction of Simon. The depiction of Jesus in Matthew is of somebody who considers himself uniquely privileged and capable to teach people about God. He says, for example, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, that his teachings are like whoever follows his teachings resembles a person who builds his house on the Petra, on the rock. And that house can withstand all the storms that might come its way because it was built on the Petra. Later in Matthew chapter 11, verse 27, he says that nobody knows the Father except for the Son and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. So Jesus alone knows who God is. He says that he is the stone. There he uses a different word. The word is lithos and not petra, but stone and rock are not such different things, once more. And then in Matthew chapter 23, in verses 8 through 10, Jesus says this. He says, you are not to be called instructors among his disciples. He says, you are not to be called instructors because you all have one instructor, the Messiah. And he says, you are all brothers. Okay, so the way that Jesus is presented in Matthew is as a uniquely privileged teacher about God. Teachings is like somebody who teaches, or to think of the depiction of Peter, on the other hand, in Matthew's gospel is almost universally negative. Peter almost cannot do anything right. This is the one episode in Matthew's gospel where it seems that Peter is depicted in a positive light. But before this, he does things that are bad. And after this, the depiction of Peter seemingly gets worse. So for example, he falls into the ocean, or he falls into the lake when he's walking on the water because of his lack of faith. Immediately after this episode, he rebukes Jesus for teaching that he should be killed and resurrect from the dead. And Jesus rebukes him back and he calls him Satan. Later on, Peter
Hey,
seems unwilling to forgive.
And let's analyze here and then kind of skip because we kind of get the
So pretty brief comments on this one. I think this is probably among Stephen's like weakest arguments because it really doesn't mean much, if I'm honest. Because
I agree with you, but at the same time, it's like given what the Catholics say, the way the Catholics use the passage, he's being consistent with how the Catholics use. The Catholics like to make mountains out of molehills all the time. But then why can't? So if I'm thinking as a Catholic, you are being correct. But if you put yourself in the shoes of a Catholic apologist and you're going to be consistent with your methodology, how is Nemes doing anything wrong here?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That is a very good point. Where to kind of to articulate it clearly. It's that so like you have like in bloody like criminal law, for example, you have your direct evidence, like stuff that actually points to something, versus circumstantial evidence, where it's like, yeah, it's possible, but it could also be like a dozen other things. The Romanists will point to highly circumstantial evidence and then draw the bullseye around their interpretation, say, hey, look, bang, we got evidence, we got proof right here. And no offense to Dr. Nemes, but that's kind of what he's doing here. Because
I don't know how Aiken could criticize him, but I can understand how you can criticize him.
Yes. And I will actually go that in a second as well. Because it's frankly very easy to explain on a Catholic paradigm, on any paradigm really. Like, yes, Peter was crap, pretty crap most of it, but as is the very nature of salvation history and the gospel message, God takes like the worst and the weakest of those and makes them the greatest, the heads of nations, the heads of empires and all that stuff, for example. So frankly, a Catholic would easily turn that on his head and say, well, actually, it's as Jesus himself said, the least shall be the greatest. And so Peter at one point was the least in some respect, and now, bang, he's the Pope. So a Catholic could very easily turn that on its head. The way he should have, the argument he should have given in here, of Peter's depiction in the New Testament. Actually, does he give that later? I don't think he actually does. I don't know. I think he might. I think he kind of alludes to it, but not a whole ton. Actually, I think he does. But basically, the argument that Peter is, frankly, a very minor figure in the New Testament. Really, he's not exercising like and not just he's not mentioned here, therefore no Pope, but just in areas that are pretty relevant and pertinent and all that. He doesn't really play a whole massive role, and when he does appear, he doesn't appear to be any different than the other apostles.
When my Q&A,
at minimum, should cause us to ask questions.
When my Q&A question comes up, I'll make a point here. But what he should have said, and what I did say in the live Q&A, which got some feedback, was the Pope only succeeds Peter in his denial of Christ.
Bruh, who said that?
It was like, I forget who it is. Let me look it up. It might be Richard Baxter or something. I'll check.
Oh, that's freaking spicy.
We can move to the next one.
Yes. Really quickly. So I feel like Dr. Nemes could have mentioned Matthew 18:18 to help exegete the passage better and possibly show how binding and loosing powers no exclusive to Peter. So the thing is, that wouldn't that be outside this passage's debate. The debate's focused on whether the Peter is the rock. So that wouldn't really cover it. It'd be a bit of a tangent. So yeah. Reformed presbyter. In terms of context, to my knowledge, this would be the only time in all Scripture when a being who is not God is referred to as a rock. I could see the Catholics turning that around and end up saying, "Hey, that actually means that Peter is really, really special now." If that's really the only time that happens, to which I would then just raise 51 proofs for a Pauline papacy and Ephesian primacy, which is an absolute work of brilliance, that article, absolute brilliance, and I will be using it in my streams as well because it's just straight up true.
It would make a good video. Just use
Sorry?
it for a video.
That's actually a freaking
you should just take that and make that a video.
I'll take the 10 best ones and make that like a semi-serious, semi-memey video. I think I might actually do that. That'd be really funny. I'll skip ahead a little bit for Nemes to continue his arguments.
He says, how many times am I supposed to weeps bitterly? There is no more mention of Peter in Matthew's gospel at all. Now, it's true that when Jesus resurrects, the 11 that I would make is that Matthew's depiction of Jesus and his depiction of Simon in the gospel would not fit if you think that Simon is the rock. And the last time Simon is even mentioned by depiction of things in Matthew, Peter, and on this rock, it doesn't make any sense, therefore, that you would be changing reference. Well, I think actually that there is an interesting parallel with this text and some other instance in the New Testament where Jesus seems to be referring to himself, even though contextually you would be expecting him to be referring to something else. And that's in John chapter 2.
This is the third argument.
Jesus cleanses the temple. He drives out the money changers and the money lenders and so on. And then the Jews come to him and they say, on whose authority are you doing this? And Jesus says, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And then the Jews ask him, this temple has been under construction for 46 years and you're going to rebuild it in 2 days, or in 3 days. But then John comments and he says, but he was referring to the temple of his body. So notice what's happening here. Every reasonable person would understand Jesus in context to be referring to the building because he says this temple and he's in the temple building. And that's what makes sense in the context. So it's reasonable to suppose that he's talking about the building that he's in. But actually, he's talking about himself. So Jesus can confusingly and counter-contextually refer to himself by using a phrase like this temple. And he can still be referring to himself, even though context might make better sense in context that he'd be referring to something else. Well, that's the same thing that's going on here, according to my reading. Okay, so once more, if we accept Augustine's interpretation that Petros means of the rock and Christ is the Petra, then you can see why Jesus is using 2 different words here, or why Matthew makes Jesus use 2 different words. He says to Simon, you are Petros, you are of the rock, and epi tau te Petra, on this rock, which I am, I will build my church. So there is a parallel here between the way that Jesus confusingly refers to himself, sort of against the.
So this argument, it's not wrong. It's fair, but at best, it just makes Stephen's interpretation possible. And that's all it does. It doesn't. And I think he acknowledged this, but I don't think he should have spent an
well, I think we shouldn't camp out here for interest of time. Yeah. But I think what Nemes is doing is kind of one of the things I suggest. One of the things against what the Catholics like to do when they argue for a papacy against the historical evidences is that they like to isolate them, and instead of saying like, well. Okay, but we have like 10 things pointing in the same direction.
Yeah.
Right. So what Nemes is trying to, whether he's successful or not, I don't know. But like, what Nemes is trying to do the same thing. Is like,
right. Yeah. Well,
there's like multiple reasons to think that. So he's allowing it to be possible. Is part. You shouldn't isolate it. But think of it in terms of its overall structure, in terms of his as another thing in his overall point.
Yeah, and this goes back to what you said before about how he's basically like Jimmy Aiken couldn't consistently actually critique Nemesh's argument here because he basically does the same thing, which is a great point. But I think like Nemes doesn't present these as just, well, according to Catholic logic, this. So I'm going to use that same logic to do this. He's actually presenting these as like as genuine arguments in themselves, and so we could retroactively look at it and say, I mean, hey, the Catholic can't actually critique this, but I don't think that's what Nemes is intending here. Nemes, if you're listening after the fact, please give it here. But it doesn't look like he's actually intending that. So this would, simply by the intent of the kind of argument he's making, this would be erroneous. Otherwise, if he did make it clear that this is just according to Catholic logic, it'd be pretty bang on. It'd be fantastic. It'd be awesome. But yeah, that's pretty much that. So we won't camp out in here. We'll skip it ahead just a little bit more. The most important one will be Nemesh's chiasm. I think I'll just summarize, because debate reviews don't have to like many debate reviews just don't look at the debate at all. They just summarize the people who are watching their view. So to summarize, his other stronger argument is not perfect, but stronger is, kind of depends how you look at it. How Peter himself is never singled out as the foundation of the church, and with consideration that one of the key foundations of the Christian faith. Sorry, that's my notes. Let me. Okay, TLDR. Nemes then argues, I think it's argument number 4, that Peter's never singled out as the foundation of the church. Christ is, the apostles are, but Peter himself is never singled out as the foundation of the church. And I believe his conclusion is highly correct in terms of making a very strong argument from silence that we would expect somewhere, particularly in a number of passages where it would be highly pertinent and relevant to just one place.
Like when in Ephesians 2:20,
sorry?
Maybe he does mention Ephesians 2:20, where the church is built on the foundation of the prophets and the apostles.
He does.
It would make sense on it from a Catholic paradigm that Peter would be singled out.
Whatchamacallit, he says that, so Peter's never anywhere singled out, but Christ and the apostles are said to be the foundation of the rock. And I think his conclusion is correct. And because we would expect someone, because don't forget, the New Testament corpus is 27 first century Christian works by apostles and their followers, which is huge. That's absolutely massive. And we normally look at, people normally, including Roman Catholics, make arguments from silence from a much smaller corpus at a time, whether we're talking about, for example, the 2nd century or whatnot. So that's huge. That's actually really big, including on a number of passages and even entire letters that are focused on ecclesiology and just like the foundations of the Christian faith, what you got to do, what you got to submit to, who your authorities are. And not once is Peter mentioned as a foundation. So if he angled it a bit more towards that, he didn't, unfortunately, it's so sad, it sucks, he didn't really go towards that route. But then again, it wouldn't have been the most pertinent kind of thing to the exact topic. But I believe nonetheless, he gets to the conclusion from a slightly too rigid a reading of typology and imagery, because as I said before, typology and imagery, they're fluid in their nature. Like that, you can have the same imagery being used to different reference. So literally, right, like in this very one here, where it refers to the apostles as the foundation, and then elsewhere Christ is meant to be the foundation or the cornerstone and all that stuff. So pretty much the same imagery, but use a different reference because they're looking at different aspects of the Christian faith. So I think it was too rigid in that later argument in his typology, because a Catholic could simply respond to it, yeah, that's all true. The apostles are the foundation in a certain sense. Christ is a foundation in another sense, and Peter's a foundation in another sense. Now, of course, whether that's actually true is a different argument, but it still opens up the possibility. So I don't think it works a whole ton, basically. But yeah.
All right.
Okay, so let's skip ahead to Nemes's chiasm, which is it's another somewhat, actually. Let me look at let me see my notes in it just in case it's not really. Now that I think about it, I don't know. Do you want to look at it? Because I didn't really make a whole ton of.
No, I'm fine with skipping it.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just summarize it, and he basically gives just like thematic parallels along the chiasm, basically thematic parallels along the chiasm, and that the center of the chiasm is basically centered on Christ and the gospel message. And that's actually the true emphasis of the passage that Peter is receiving. And this is basically giving his Nemes's interpretation of the binding and loosing statement, which I don't actually agree with. And I don't know if you would either, Geoff, but basically that Peter's binding and loosing power, given the rest of the passage, is simply explicating the gospel message and all that. I believe it's more than that. It's actually prophetic.
Yeah, based on what you've done, we did with Swan. I think it is more than that, but
yeah,
that
that's
is a
it.
traditional. I know that's might be Calvin's view or something like that. Not that they had a lot of access to the rabbinic literature, but I think the Catholics kind of read it weird too. It's kind of like a post hoc, like
Yeah, that's it.
like this is what we're doing. I'm, I have this power. I want control over people. So then we're going to read into the text with a power I already claim for myself. If that makes sense.
That's it. And yeah, so it wasn't the highest thing. It wasn't the most incredible construction, but it did do a good job of basically showing, look, we can read the chiasm in different ways. Like it's Jimmy's categories of Christ is strictly just identifying Peter here, and this middle part of it is the most important. Therefore, it means Peter is a rock. That's simply not it's simply not a given. So Nemes does a good job in his chiasm bit. Is it nonetheless shows that there are other ways of
there are other options.
And
do we have a timestamp for? Did anyone ever ask about the patristics?
Did anyone ask about the pictures? I'm not sure. I didn't see all the super chats myself. So I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure on that. But
Well, okay, so let's just mention like the patristics. I don't want the Catholics.
Are you talking about use of patristics in these arguments, or
the patristic understanding of Matthew 16?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Like to me, like I'll say Achilles heel. I'm not sure it's devastating, but the based on their view of church history and knowledge being passed down and stuff like that, it seems really weird that the patristics are like all over the place on this, and that at best people viewing, I don't even know if it's a plurality view, but at best it's not even a majority view that people are referencing this as being like primarily about Peter.
Yeah, that's it.
And then of course Aiken is arguing this as the primary meaning. He does argue that this is the primary meaning, even though other things can flow from that.
That's it. And then, of course, well, those fathers who interpret it differently, they're not saying that Peter isn't the rock. I mean, when they bring that up, I'm like, brah. Oh man, but yeah, as you were saying,
I think that's a problem for the Catholic view. In terms because they also, I mean, from a Protestant view, we can just say, well, okay, they were wrong. But for them, it's like they have to have this knowledge passed down, and the Pope was the Pope for all ages.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the problems of the plurality of patristic exegesis, particularly, well, the fact I remember looking at the survey ages ago, but basically it was a majority patristic opinion. Well, the majority of patristic opinions was against the view of the Petrine papacy, and I think it was either specifically Christ the confession or Christ himself. But either way, why it's problematic is because this isn't just a peripheral passage where some people have said, hey, look, this proves a papacy, but then certain church fathers disagree with it. But nonetheless, there's other clear passages that demonstrate the papacy. This passage isn't peripheral, nor is it merely like imagery or typological. This is actually meant to be the central core passage where the papacy itself is basically established here. And it's what was I going to say? The papacy itself is established there, really the only majorly clear text demonstrating it. And this is supposed to be the foundation of the Christian faith. But you get where I'm going with it, all that jazz. And so for that passage, that alleged that event to be the establishment of such a core pillar, if not arguably the core pillar of the Christian faith when it comes to determining truth, and yet for it to actually have objectively established that, and yet for so many church fathers to totally miss that, apparently, that needs some answers. That really does need some answers. This isn't a peripheral passage where you could tolerate disagreement on. I don't think you can tolerate a majority absence of the necessary interpretation. I wonder what you think.
Especially from Aiken's point of view, where it's the primary meaning.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it just goes to show the look, to go with the consistent Roman Catholic consensus of the fathers and all that stuff, clearly the fact that there is a fair bit of division on this passage really does show that it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's not as clear as they really claim. Yeah, pretty much that. But hey, Fezzik, good to see you, cuz. According to Heschmeyer's view of the papacy, Peter is the rock, and that means the popes won't be able to totally destroy the church.
Yay, that's really what that means.
Yay. I mean, they can whittle it down by 99%, but
And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, can get really close, but you can but
they can
if the Pope can rub his tummy one way and do his head the other way on a Tuesday with hopping on one foot during the spring equinox while he's going counterclockwise, in those very specific instances, he can't err. That's what that passage means.
I'm gonna clip this. I'm gonna clip this section. I need to get back to making short clips of streams and uploading. I'm gonna clip this 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, moving on. I'm gonna go to like the main, really the core bit, where Aiken actually does respond to the Petros-Petra argument, why they're using two separate words, and it really does expose the sandy foundation of his argument. So it's at 53:11. I'm gonna jump there right now. 53:11, and so
more remote context. But your argument, with the exception of argument 1, really didn't deal with the immediate context. Only the Petros-Petra argument did. And I don't find that convincing. I mean, I agree with you.
Brief point, somewhat fair point by Aiken. Nemes disproportionately dealt with other outside passages and contexts and not enough with the core passage itself. I do agree with that criticism. Anyway.
That Jesus could have said Petros twice, and he didn't. Well, why might that be? Well, hypothetically, it could be because he's changing the subject. And Petra refers to something different than Petros.
Really quickly, Geoff, that joke will be stored in the treasury of merit. You just saved many people's years off purgatory.
Nice.
Very nice.
I think for the reasons I indicated, that's not what's happening. It could be, here's option number 2, if you do want to say that he's meaning something different by the word Petra, like large stone, it could be he's using synthetic parallelism and saying, okay, Peter, you look like a little stone, but on the big rock you are in God's eyes, I'm going to build my church.
That's a lot of extra work.
You're going to grow into, I'm going to build my church. Third possibility, simple stylistic variation. Even in every language, we don't like repeating the same word too often in a row. And so we have things like pronouns and synonyms and alternate forms of the word. And that could be what's going on here. Jesus just didn't, or Matthew rather, because this was really in Aramaic, Matthew just didn't want to repeat the word Petros that closely twice in succession. So he used a variant. He used a synonym for the same thing and expected his reader to pick up on the meaning. Just like if I was talking to a doctor named Stone, and I said to this doctor, let's say it's at an award ceremony, we're going to build a wing of the hospital in
analogies, is anyone?
Yeah. I once went to a podiatrist whose name was Dr. Foot, like Foote. And I'm like in the middle of the appointment. I'm just like, I'm sorry. I just have to ask, is this a stage name? He's like, no, it's my real name. It's just... All right, keep going.
Hey, predestination is true.
His honor. I could say, Dr. Stone, you're a marvelous physician, and on this rock, we're going to build a whole new wing of the hospital. Well, I just made a shift even more dramatic.
Notice that. Okay, so that's an English example. When he said that, hey, Dr. Stone, you're great, and on this rock, we're going to build a new thing. I have no idea who the referent of this rock is. That's the thing. Like, he really just demonstrated our point that is actually a really confusing way of addressing the same person. It's really is confusing. What on earth is this rock? I mean,
well, was Peter his nickname? Do we have any indication it was his nickname, like before Jesus?
It was, yeah. Jesus actually did call him Kepha back in John 6, I believe. So I think actually right at the beginning of when he picked him out, that's what he did. So yeah, yeah.
He could have been like a rough, burly guy who that was his nickname.
Maybe. Well, I think it's what Jesus.
And Jesus is just using a play on word, or I'm not. Okay. I mean,
but yeah. So to briefly on that, I think that example actually just proves the point of just how grammatically bizarre, like it is for this rock to be referring to you, Peter, because that example, I do not immediately think that Dr. Stone and this rock are the same thing. In fact, I'm inclined against that because when you say Dr. Stone, then they're not that name doesn't actually, well, on its own, it doesn't actually have significance. That's just their last name, Dr. Stone. And so, well, if that kind of makes sense, but which is of course not parallel with the passage because Jesus is trying to get significance out of Peter's name. But either way, he still demonstrates the grammatical bizarreness of jumping from one word to another and jumping from second person to third person demonstrative immediately.
yeah, I
It
think they
doesn't
have
work.
also like they've failed to recognize that Peter. This passage doesn't establish Peter as the only stone or the primary stone.
Yeah, that's it. That's actually a really good point, and that's I think that's one of the layers of interpretation that Hayes had on that article. Really good article. I'll show it off in the later stream, but to the main point on this is basically what you mentioned, Geoff. How like, oh look, your interpretation could be correct, but it also could be this. Basically, it was a really this was the primary argument. Really, this was like the primary solid argument by Nemes that even though it could have had a bunch of other elements, that on its own was powerful, and the response was the response was basically, well, yeah, sure, but it could be that Jesus is doing this. He has to import all of these extra concepts, which we can grant they're technically possible. We can say maybe they're technically possible, and yet it requires us to adopt a much more difficult reading of the passage against what is very frankly clearly in front of our faces. Different reference, second person, third person, masculine, feminine, Petros, Petra.
Hey, Paul, I only have a half hour left. Do you mind?
Let's jump to this.
Can we get to my Q&A question?
Wait, what?
If we,
Oh, yeah, super chats. That's what I meant. Yeah, super chats. Let's do that. Okay.
Can you do mine since they're not out of
Yeah,
order?
yeah, that's it. Of course. Yeah, I'll start with yours because you came just before mine. So 133.30.
And we can always skip back or whatever.
Yeah, sure. 133.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. Hang on. Right there.
There.
And really quickly, this was an Aramaic triggered Potamopatos. Good
There's
to see
Canadian
you,
Catholic. Good job, Canadian Catholic.
Wait, where is he?
He's up on the screen.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Joshua Basco. Very base. Very nice. You think that for something as foundation of the basis of scriptural evidence being much more substantial? 100% agreed. Anyway.
Very nice comment. Stephen is pretty smart. I'll give him that. Kind of smart. All right. A goy for Jesus. He says, if the Petrine office in the New Testament is about evangelizing Jews, apostle to the circumcision, wouldn't the papal office's views about never doing that mitigate against the reality of an ongoing office?
Can you pause?
So
Pause.
Spicy.
That is the office he's given in the Bible. Is that he's the apostle?
That's actually a strong point. Actually, I've got to get that passage. That's actually a strong point. I actually forgot about that. Yeah.
That's his office. He's an apostle to the Jews. He's not head of the whole church. He's an emissary to the Jews. Some people think when he's talking about Babylon, he's talking about literal Babylon in Mesopotamia. Because guess who were a lot of people still left in Babylon? Jews. There's a lot of Jews in Babylon. There's a Babylonian Talmud, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I'm personally still partial to the code word Babylon thing somewhat. But either way, and it would still work because there were a lot of Jews in Rome. There were. But either way it doesn't really matter.
I'm not saying he didn't go to Rome. I'm just saying, like, it's a possibility that he went to where there were a lot of Jews. Yeah,
that's well. Either interpretation, Babylon, actual Babylon, or Rome. There was a lot of Jews in both, so it makes sense in either case. So yeah, that's pretty solid, pretty rock solid actually. Get it, rock, love track. Want to keep going?
Yeah. Well, so what my point here was I knew how Aiken was going to answer. My point in this was to kind of show, like, hey, you don't even succeed Peter you don't even exercise the office that you were actually assigned.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you took on the whole head of the whole church, and you were like,
Except the Jews.
The apostle to the Jews is like, don't evangelize Jews. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Don't do that. That's anti-Semitism, bro. Because the Holocaust, remember that? Don't do that. Don't do that.
Mitigate against the reality of an ongoing office.
So
I
who
suppose
do you
that's
want-
for. Yeah, I was
me?
going to say. I
Okay.
suppose that's for you. And then Stephen, if you've got any comments, feel free to
Well,
share.
popes can make mistakes, and actually the Pope has not said don't evangelize Jews.
Yeah, he did.
There are sensitivity.
Yeah.
Go ask the Pope. Go ask him. Go ask. Yeah, the Pope who thinks that the atheist father of that kid in heaven. Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Go read
That-
Akin 2. Okay.
that Jews and Muslims share in the plan of salvation. Right.
Yeah, sure.
I would actually like to look that up, like Francis or any popes, but probably most likely Francis' particular statements on evangelizing Jews.
Well, that Raymond Brown quote that's very Rome does not change change itself in a blunt way. It requotes the past with praise, and then basically, I'm going to paraphrase Brown here. He requotes the past with praise, and then pours a new meaning. It's kind of like what the Protestant liberals did. The Protestant liberals were like, okay, here's a new confession of faith, and we give it ambiguous language so the liberals can read it one way, and the conservatives can say, or just taking it on good faith and say this is okay. So that's what Catholics do, is that they give something that Jimmy Aiken can be like, this is fine and agrees with the past, and then but really what they're saying is don't evangelize Jews. Okay.
Yeah.
If any Catholic group went out evangelizing Jews, their magisterium would freak out if it became well known. Let's not lie. Jimmy. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, pretty much. I was looking at a statement by it was like this commission to the Jews or whatever, and it had a pretty shocking statement about not evangelizing Jews, but either way. It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. Even if we technically grant that this doesn't technically falsify the papacy, it grinds a lot on a spiritual level in a way. But yeah, we'll keep going.
To me, the most interesting part of this question is Nemes's response, which I guess we should get into.
Okay.
In light of the Holocaust about how that needs to be done. But even if you had the Pope today saying never evangelize Jews, that would just mean he's wrong. That would mean he's not the Pope. He's not the successor of Peter, because Peter did things that were wrong. But that doesn't mean that Jesus didn't give him an office. All of the apostles received offices from Jesus, and all of the apostles still made mistakes. So you would expect the later popes to certainly do the same as well.
Any comments, Stephen?
Here, mute yourself.
I don't have very many comments. I do think that this objection is, you can respond to it, you can meet it. I will note this. I do think that the conception of papal infallibility in Roman Catholicism is very precisely defined, to the extent that it's very difficult, nearly impossible to falsify. And I think that that's actually...
it's disappointing for those who would like to falsify it.
Pause.
Yeah, I think that it
Ooh,
Jimmy,
boy.
when Jimmy did this, I was like, what?
Let's
let's
rewind it. Let's rewind the tape, shall we?
Yeah, it's like
very difficult.
What Nemes is describing here is that they've made it. It's kind of. I have a clip from Jordan Cooper where the Catholics make so many distinctions that basically everything becomes unfalsifiable, right? So, and also this is also another example of what they do is the Mott and Bailey. Oh, we have the Pope, and this is before Francis. Before Francis, it was like, we have the Pope, and the Pope makes everything clear, so you're not freaking out about everything, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, they don't argue that way. because the Pope's Francis. So the mott is what the castle, the Bailey. If the Mott and Bailey type of argument is like you argue for what you want, and then when someone challenges you, you run up into the castle and defend yourself into the well, is it a Tuesday on a spring equinox where I'm rubbing my belly in my head? It was like, no, then I can't be falsified. So
that's
unum sanctum, which everybody took seriously for almost 1,000 years or 700 years or something like that. That's not infallible. Why?
nuance, bro.
Because I don't agree with it today. Anything I don't agree with today,
that's
it wasn't infallible. So we have 3 infallible things. And one of the infallible things, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, where we have a bunch of patristic evidence against, they argue that there's a unanimous consent of the fathers. Okay, the Pope says there's a unanimous consent of the fathers, but it's not. So, so what you have to argue is that the argument the Pope is using to establish the Immaculate Conception is fallible, but the conclusion is protected from error.
Yeah, that was when I saw that quote from William Ott, specifically in James White's Dividing Line. I had to look it up myself, and I was like, my word, that is sacrificing basic rational thought on the altar of Rome. That's there's no other way to put it, frankly.
Yeah, like,
it's
just think
incredible.
of it. Like you can make. So the Pope erred on saying there was a unanimous consent for the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
But the conclusion's okay.
That's it, yeah. Jake, thank you so much for that super chat, brother. I so appreciate it. The unanimous consensus of the fathers who agree with me. That's pretty much it. Unfortunately, it is pretty much that. It's so, man, it is really, really funny. Just taking the basic sense of that word. Even if we grant unanimous doesn't mean every single individual, it just means like a wide majority. Okay, I can grant that. I could even couch that a little bit more and say 70%, which frankly isn't unanimous. But let's say even that. We don't even have that for the Immaculate Conception. We don't have, like, the fathers of the first 5 centuries, let's say, which I looked at pretty extensively. We don't have 70%. We don't have 60%. We don't have 50%. We have, with the possible exception of actually no, I don't even know any exceptions. Basically 0%. Like they're not all directly comment and say, oh yeah, Mary never sinned, but when they get to the topic of Mary and sin, every single one of them say that in some way she was touched by sin. So
I think what I've heard in other non-religious contexts is that when you point out the Mott and Bailey, that kind of is the refutation. It's to show what they're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Is sufficient.
And can you remind me which one's the Mott and which one's the Bailey again?
The Bailey, I'm pretty sure the Bailey is the really nice meadow area, maybe with a little bit of a fence or something.
So what you're arguing for? That's the
the Pope clears up all doctrinal disputes and is the source of unity, and then
the Mott is the easier to defend position you retreat to if you're challenged.
That you don't really want. You don't really want that the Pope is. We can only identify 3 places.
So the Bailey,
one of which has a logical error. Another which doesn't pop up until the 5th century with the Assumption of Mary. Okay, we got 3 identifiable, infallible things. Did you wake up your mom?
Press like the stream and subscribe and comment if you love your mum. But anyway, so a good example would basically be, I'll make this quick, would basically be the Bailey would be we must do affirmative action for minorities, and then someone challenges that, and then the Mott is, oh, what, do you hate black people? Something like that, basically. But anyway,
the Mott is just it's like very hard to dispute because it's so narrowly defined.
Well, I'll also be more like, well, I just want to help black people. Don't you want to help black people?
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Another thing that makes me think twice about the papacy is that these are people who study the whole life, have PhD studying the magisterium, and they disagree on what the Pope has actually said. Yeah, that can mean something, although I don't really put much stock on my scholars say, so not really. But yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Jake is saying I got that mixed up. That the Bailey is the more controversial one.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because it's Mott.
The Mott is less controversial. And
Mott and less one.
Anyway, yeah. So I was right. So the Mott is the castle. The Bailey is the meadow, the pleasant area you want to be, not in the dank castle.
Yes, the dank castle. Let's.
And I think that's actually.
It's disappointing for those who would like to falsify it.
Yeah, I
have to replay that for the third time. Just people burn this in your brain.
Extent that it's very difficult, nearly impossible to falsify, and I think that's actually.
It's disappointing for those who would like to falsify it.
Yeah, I think that it can be considered. I suppose maybe you could in principle consider this a point against it. Basically, the idea is that the Pope is only guaranteed to be right in very specific and highly specified circumstances, and he can be the Pope and carry all the authorities of the Pope with the necessary qualifications made, even though he doesn't resemble anything like what a Pope should be. So it's not so much that the Pope as a person is very particularly important or whatever. It's the office of the Pope that is more important, and only in particular circumstances is there sort of a total overlap between the office and the person. When a Pope, for example, speaks ex cathedra and defines some matter of faith and morals, then there is a total overlap between person and office, so that you have to obey what he's taught. But if he's not speaking in those circumstances, if he's just being himself, then even though he's the Pope, he may not live up to the expectations or the sort of the dignity of the office. He can be wrong about things. Maybe it can even be right to disobey him in certain circumstances, as long as, once more, he's not speaking in those very precisely defined circumstances.
And I would agree. I think that's a very nice statement of the situation, and it's essential.
Is that basically the end of the response to your question, or?
Keep going. I think it might not be.
Okay.
Essentially what we see in the New Testament with Peter. He's not infallible when he's making dinner arrangements in Antioch, or most of the time, Peter is not infallible, but he is infallible.
This is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about actual religious stuff. The Pope is falling down on one of the actual offices described by Peter. And it's not about the Pope trying to pick out whether he wants Cheerios or bran flakes. Okay, we're talking about something that's actually pertinent to his job. It'd be like saying the president just doesn't want to sign laws anymore, or run the military or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
When he writes 1st and 2nd Peter, his two inspired encyclicals.
All right, I guess that's it.
Whoops, pulled up the wrong scene here.
And immediately after your question is mine. So very good transition.
I thought you were before, but okay.
No, I was after. I was right after. Adam, solid to see you here as usual, buddy. Hope you're having an excellent day.
No, I did. I got the right one. Okay, here's the next question from the other Paul. He says, the question for Jimmy. For your case today, you adopted a Protestant method of looking at the text and not minding patristic opinion. Will you consistently apply this in other scriptural debates against Protestants?
Keep in mind how Aiken responds here. I think it's possible how he starts. I think I tripped him up a little bit with this one. It looked like he had to kind of think about it a little bit, but just keep watching.
Well, I didn't exclude patristic opinion. I think that in order to interpret a text, we have to deal with the text first on its own terms, and to the extent needed, we can then pull in additional information. Now, in interpreting a scriptural text, it needs to not contradict other things I know as a Catholic, but this isn't. The meaning of Peter being the rock does not contradict other things, and so I don't need to go to the church fathers, and they're mixed anyway. So for purposes of a discussion like this, nose counting the fathers and
Geoff.
Yeah, but given this is the Catholic whack-a-mole thing, where I one of the things I like to stress and from my studies and interactions with Catholics, Catholic apologists, is that, you know, they're so focused on like the immediate at hand battle that they miss a battle on a different battlefield that they are not consistent with.
Yep.
So, okay, but you have a certain view of church history and how things have transmitted.
Yep.
So for you to just blithely say like, oh, these church fathers, yeah, they're inconsistent on Matthew 16 or something. It's like,
yeah, that's it.
Why? Why are they inconsistent on Matthew 16?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Okay, you can't. Well, so it's saying like if all the church fathers pointed in one way, they would definitely be, I think, given their conception of history, would be pointing that out, right? So when it goes the other way and there's a mixture, I think that mitigates against their point. So that's all.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Hang on, I'm trying to look at the flipping trying to look at the specifics, see if they take a look. Whatever. But my basics are obviously my question. So my response would simply be, it's the whole unequal weights and measures issue now, where as you would stress out a lot, where on one hand, hey, let's appeal to the fathers. Hey, the fathers have this, therefore that's proof of something. But then, as Aiken himself says, look, the fathers are quite mixed in this, and I just deemed now all of a sudden I don't have to appeal to the fathers on this passage. But I think it's actually quite important why you wouldn't appeal, because like if you can appeal to, hey, look, the fathers, the majority of them at least say this, therefore at least the majority say this, therefore that's a superior interpretation of Scripture, or let's say unanimity. But then I could simply appeal to the same situation. Let's say it is massively divided. I do believe there is actually a genuine majority towards Christ being the rock, and then the rest of it split between Peter and Peter's faith. But even ignoring that, even let's say that like there is truly like a fair degree of confusion, that there really is a wide diversity of opinions. Why can't I pull from that and say, therefore the passage is really vague and you can't establish a papacy from it because it's just too vague? So I mean, why can't I do that if we're talking about
beyond all the leaps?
Elsewhere we emphasize the fathers' authority. So we follow the fathers and where they're unanimous. But should we not also take pause in the Catholic paradigm, at least, where the fathers themselves are quite divided on something? I mean, what's happening here? And then again, I just bring up my earlier point about how this isn't a passage where you can afford mixed opinion in the fathers. Like, okay, one or two or whoever individuals, yeah, sure, not an absolute majority, but a functional unanimity at least.
On
a
an
functional
office, the most important office in the church
is alleged. It's being established right here, and yet for the majority of fathers to not see that, to not make that observation, what gives? What gives there?
One of Adam's comments, scroll up a little, not the 80% one, but the one
common inconsistency with Rome. They love appealing to fathers, but when they don't conform, they are thrown away as basically useless, as they are just private theologians and don't speak for the church. Yeah, pretty much.
Dominic,
on one hand, to be fair for Aiken, I don't know if he does this. I haven't read much of his work, so I don't want to strawman him. I don't want to accuse him of hypocrisy he may not have, but I think I may have seen some stuff before him where he talks about like, oh, look, we should appeal to the fathers for interpreting Scripture in order to come to a meaning for it. But at least with other Roman apologists, other Roman apologists, they'll talk about, look, we've got to appeal to the fathers because they're the disciples of the apostles and the disciples of the disciples of the apostles and all that jazz to interpret things. And then suddenly with at least with other apologists, so not necessarily with Aiken, but at least with other ones, including ones he works with, let's be real, where they'll say all that. Then suddenly we come to this issue and we say, well, okay, well, guess what? There's a majority of fathers who actually hold a different interpretation. Or if we grant that it's not a strong majority, the fact that there's quite a bit of division shows that your interpretation is probably not apostolic, at least on your paradigm. So what gives there? So why fathers in one area and then no fathers? The key thing being that, look, you can't interpret Scripture properly without the fathers. But then, and this is really the crux of my question. I don't think Aiken really got it. It's the whole point of method. It's that, so at one point, you need the fathers to interpret scripture, even if we grant that they're mixed, okay? But you still need the fathers to interpret scripture in other topics. But now suddenly, it's okay for you to go to, frankly, the core method of the Protestants and just look at the text. I mean, come on. Really? Really?
Well, to me, you know what I think we should do is we should get that that meme from Toy Story where like Andy's from the Dream in Toy Story where Andy's throwing Woody in the trash.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
I don't want to play with you anymore. And then like just label it like church fathers when they're like disagree with Rome. I don't want to play with you anymore.
I'm gonna flipping. Oh my!
I know that meme is around and used
gosh.
for a few different things. It's not like the most common, but that would be like.
I think I will do that. I think I will actually do that. That's very, very spicy. Taste says it does have to be the majority of fathers, or else it really isn't part of apostolic tradition. Ooh,
At
boy,
the
there
very
you go.
least, you couldn't establish it. Could be, but like you couldn't know it for any like certainty, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is on the Roman Catholic paradigm, and I'm a Zwinglian, so let's be. I mean, come on, at least on the Eucharist, but yeah.
No, but like for you to like, that would be the bare minimum to establish, that it comes from a apostle.
Yeah. And
then it's the most
Catholic view of the indefectibility of the church, their specific idea of the indefectibility of the church. So that's the key thing as well. Where the majority can't be, like huge majority can't be wrong. Come on.
I got 8 minutes, so anything we.
I think that's basically it. Give us like the speed run concluding thoughts, and then quickly hook up Q&A. And if you have to go in the middle of that's all good. I'll finish it up.
Yeah, I mean the debate was okay. I think Nemes made some good points. I think Aiken held his own, and but I think to me the death knell of the papacy is actually looking at history, because you can go like I can, this passage could establish blah 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 blah, and then you're just like, well, I don't see the papacy in history. I it's hard to even make a case for a single head bishop at Rome, early on, let alone like the bishop of Rome being the head of the whole church in history. So, stick that into your Bayesian analysis, and I come out with a big fat 0. That's just me.
Yeah.
To me, like I think our friend John Bugay analysis is correct. Is that the city of Rome in the Western Roman Empire was the only big city. And that's why in Eastern Roman Empire, you have major areas, major, bishops and stuff. You have 4 or 5 of them in the East. And then you have just one in the West. So I think what's more consistent with the facts is that they got more and more power. They started accruing more power to themselves. They didn't really have to compete with an emperor anymore and that sort of thing. And with the Roman emperor. So, and I think Timothy Kaufman showed I was listening to one of his podcasts or something, is that in the ecclesiastical courts, at least in the early 300s in the Roman Empire or something, the final say, or mid 300s, was the final say in an ecclesiastical court case was the emperor of Rome. Like it could work all its way up to there. So I think that evidence alone just tells me like, oh, okay, well, if the Pope's not even the head of like ecclesiastical court cases and the emperor is, like, I guess I should become Anglican.
Well, what happened to feed my sheep, huh?
So
I'll quickly.
Sorry about that.
All good. Jake, thank you so much again for another super chat. You're an absolute legend. Thank you so much. The problem is that they'll take consensus from the late 4th century and call that apostolic teaching.
Yes,
I mean, depending on the topic,
Timothy Kaufman. I have a few clips
century,
from Timothy Kaufman on that.
6th. Yeah, that's it. They'll look at, hey, look, this Bishop of Rome at this council, or even just on this own letter, said this about himself. Therefore, papacy true. And
what they do is they they believe that a belief becomes common in the late 4th century. This happens with a number of beliefs. And then they say, therefore, it goes back to the early church.
Yeah, that's it, which is hilarious, but let's be
You know,
real.
you have to do your homework. You can't just say, like, oh, the Assumption of Mary comes up in like 500 AD. So therefore, it goes back to an apostle. Because to us, 500 is a long time ago.
It
but,
is.
But that's the equivalent of saying, like, hey, I've learned this about Christopher Columbus, and you don't see it in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s,
it.
1900s.
I mean, to be fair, they'd say that, look, we have a lot more surviving documents today, but they don't. But even then, the case.
Yeah, but to actually make it binding on everybody.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's the key problem right there. Victor seems to be the first time he really gets something close to a papacy. Yeah, that's it, and he fails. that's the funny part. Jimmy, I care about what the Old Testament says, Stephen. Here's what Jesus says in John 2. Jimmy, that's an appeal to an implication in a remote context. I mean, that's from a whole other gospel. That is a funny way of putting it. Yeah, I guess. Oh, man. Why do people think that 400 years is a short period of time? Have these people ever played the telephone game? I mean, this is one time where it is kind of a valid thing. Because it's one thing. There is good research that, like, oral transmission of exact words, like poems, for example, can last reliably for a long time. But in this case, we're talking about abstract concepts, ideas that aren't tied to specific words. That's a big problem. That is prime for corruption. And good morning to you as well, Andrew Bailey, one of my faithful former patrons and, God willing, soon to be subscribe star.
Oh, maybe if you come to the States, you can go shooting with them or something.
I would flipping love to do that one day. I want to do that stuff. Anyway, if people have any other final questions, otherwise Geoff has to go.
And what would be really based is if you come from Australia and with him, defend our southern border.
I would be paid to do that 100%.
The Australian. Get a Crocodile Dundee hat with like crocodile teeth in it or something like
that. Mate, back to the other side of the fence for you. Anyway, people, before Geoff has to go, he has like less than 3 minutes to go. Quick, dump some final questions in here if you want them for him. I'll stay on for like maybe a few minutes longer after he has to hit it.
I'll try to come up with more, off the cuff Catholic jokes.
Based. Very based.
No, but the infallibility thing, it's like, it's just like, I just don't like the weaselness of it, if that makes sense. It's like, you're obviously just trying to be like, well, no, it's not technically infallible, because it's like, it's not even I don't know.
Because he didn't do the hokey pokey and turn all about. Pretty much that.
Well, I think everybody's looks done, unless
there's many questions. I think we were pretty thorough. I'm gonna hype up I've got a billion streams coming up. Please, people, go to the channel, nuke the subscribe button if you haven't liked this stream, share it.
No, for your papacy thing, are you doing that as a live stream or a pre-recorded video?
Yes, live stream. So 2 parts. So first part is going to be the evidence of the nature of the authority structure of the early Roman Church. So whether it's monoepiscopal or pluriepiscopal and all that jazz. And then the second stream will be whether Christ actually established a Petrine office, because that's really the core question along with that. So the second one will definitely be more spicy, given that nature. But yeah, so basically that. And I'm going to be using a lot of really good resources, both scholarly stuff, but fundamentally focus on the primary source evidence. So
I would recommend holding off questions, like get through your material and then do instead of interspersing them.
Yeah, I guess so. Fair enough. So I think I'm actually
unless there's like a natural break between sections or something, then you know what I
mean?
Oh
no. So I will take questions on both, but I'll make sure that they're centered on like the core topic.
Because if you're making a very important argument, which you may also want to clip later, you don't want to just interrupt it with howdy, I just woke up from Texas or something like that. You understand what I'm saying? That's just me. You can do it however you want, but I think for future establishing something that's important to you, video wise, you want to have a flow. So if you do section 1 and then maybe questions about section 1, that could be cool.
That's an idea.
Or just do everything and then just questions at the end.
That's actually a good point. I'm actually going to consider that. That is actually very good. Hey, we got Destin's in the chat here. He gives the stats. So 16 citations of church fathers that identified the rock as Christ himself. 8 other citations that so the entire apostles were the rock themselves. 44 citations that the rock was the confession of faith made by Peter and Jesus Christ. Only 20% of the fathers interpreted Peter as the rock succession from Matthew 16. Fire out. There you go. Those are the stats I saw. Destin, mad favor. Could you send me the source for those stats? I really, really want to look it up.
I think I have a Kaufman book.
Okay, because that's actually a very strong. That's actually a huge majority. That's actually
there's a book that goes over.
80%.
I have that goes over just patristic readings of Matthew 16.
Yeah, there you go.
That's by Kaufman.
So this will probably be the last one. What do you think about Jimmy's debate tactics in this debate? It seems like he debates like a salesman would, like it's never in good faith. He's never going to be convinced by an opponent. I wouldn't say that. I think he's perfectly respectable and mostly vast majority of the time charitable, very articulate. It's just simply it's just a worldview issue. Everything comes back to a worldview issue. In the end, he's, as we all are, he's guided by his lens, but from what we can see, his lens is very faulty. So he makes very faulty claims, and he's forced to come up with very.
He seems like a really nice guy. And
I'm
not just saying this because people tell me I look like Jimmy Aiken.
Yeah, that's it. Like if a guy was a jackass, I'd probably say it. Well, without causing unnecessary beef. But either way, he is genuinely a very solid guy. One of the nicest guys I see in these
So
realms.
to me, and having interacted with Trent Horn recently, I really like Trent Horn.
Yeah, there you go.
And I like Jimmy Aiken. There are some Catholic apologists who I feel like I wouldn't want to interact with, and I'll just name Sam Shamoon, even though he's not Catholic. I'd probably rather have like a dull spoon gouging out my eyes than try to like do a debate with him or something like that.
Bruh. Anyway, do you have to hit it or?
Yeah, I better get going. You
right.
need somebody else. I'm not sure how much longer you're going on, but yeah,
I'm probably just going to call it here. It seems like a pretty good place to kind of hit it off. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been the other Paul. This has been a Go for Jesus. Do everything I said before. Subscribe to this, like that. Save the subscribe star link that I've posted before in the emergency Patreon stream. You can't subscribe to anything just yet because there's a review process. But save that link so that once I give the announcement that you can become patrons / subscribers again, then you can go right there. And yeah, basically all that. Thank you all for coming on. I hope you have an excellent day. God bless.